Hello and welcome to another very special edition of our Engineering Masterclass Fireside Chat. Whether you're an engineer, a designer, or a digital evangelist, the one word that you've probably heard a lot is human-centered design. That said, as we start to design experiences for the future, would a traditional human-centered design work? Or do we need something else to add to that mix? We have someone very special with us today who's going to talk about why she believes we need to make that shift from design thinking to design for thinking. Joanna Bickley is the head of R&D and design at Amazon Alexa, and she's an award-winning artist who's helped some of the leading brands in the world create breakthrough innovations. So Joanna, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
So Joanna, tell us, why do you believe that the future of design is cognitive and that AI is the new UI? What is the biggest trend that is going to shape human experiences in the future?
Well, let me go back to why I think that we're in the midst of this shift. And I think it's really important that human-centered design is still very critical. One of the things that has been, I think, really tough for a lot of companies that have tried to implement design thinking at scale was how do they take and scale their innovations or inventions, right? And how do they reduce risks in ways that you don't necessarily see in small prototypes? And that was an output after working with many different CEOs, whether it was in the automotive industry or with folks in industrial manufacturing or even equipment manufacturing companies. One of the things that was really clear, which was we did a really great job of thinking and innovating about what it could be, but when it came down to it, it didn't necessarily accelerate the processes and often introduced tremendous risk into a process that didn't have any room for risk. And so for me, I began to really understand that whether you were in the enterprise space or in the consumer space, is that what consumers of design, whether they were business leaders, whether they're academia, or actual consumers that are purchasing designed products, were asking for was a level of accountability inside of the design on not just was it imaginative and did it make you feel like you stepped into an episode of Star Trek, but more importantly, what was its impact? And so when I think a little bit about, what are the trends that I see emerging, one of the trends that I see emerging is the gentle balance of both. And that's why I have focused in on really putting forth a practice called cognitive experience design that unites human-centered design with scientific objective truth that helps both bring the wisdom that you need in something like by manufacturing a car, like ergonomics, that is critical, right? And that you have a scientific controls along the way in that iterative process. Or designing something like this. These are our Amazon Echo Buds, they're hearables, right? One of the things that this is, it's a microcomputer that you're putting in your ear that happens to have Alexa in it. So, I need to make sure that I'm working with the scientific and medical community to, one, ensure that we're designing for 95%, at least 95% of the global population. And how do you do that? And you recruit, and then you get into the anthropometry of the science piece of what are people's ears like? How from region to region are people's ears different? And how do I create one product that fits as many people as possible? And I think that we all utilize that. And I think in traditional design thinking, we would have come up with some great concepts and the pain points, but it never really took us to a future state. It was always I looked at it as that it solved for the now versus the augmented human state of the future, where I'm trying to augment people's intelligence and make them and give them superpowers over time. And so bringing the cognitive and neurosciences in to design thinking is really critical as we move forward as business leaders, because now I have reduced the risk, right, by doing those iterative design cycles. One, generative design, enabling us to use machine learning to create thousands of ideas, right? That then come out and then we can test and learn and get to a much better ergonomic profile, as I would call it, as we're, placing technology closer and closer to the human being.
But Joanna, AI has taken so much of a backlash lately. So how do we rebuild the trust that is being eroded? From an ethical standpoint, what are some of the fundamental principles around which a cognitive design program should be structured?
Well, let me start with, I think that you have to start from a basis of ethics. And so much, let me start with 100 years of really bad movies about AI coming to get us and take our jobs and do those things has not helped. As a matter of fact, I am working with 2 different movie makers on scripts that are the positive outcomes of what it means to augment the human ability and what we might be able to do to conquer it. Not ones where I'm answering, Dave, right? And we have. So let me start with entertainment has not helped us any, but entertainment can help us in realizing its possibility. The second part is that a part of this global reset that we are going through, for those of you that went to the virtual economic forum, which I had the opportunity of speaking with several different CEOs, and I think we all are in agreement we're in this place of a reset. Yes, there is backlash. But there is backlash, not without genuine fear. So in understanding where that backlash was coming was actually about offering transparency and dealing with the elephants in the room, which are privacy, security, right? And being really, you can dream of tomorrow, but we have to understand the constraints of now and the constraints of our intention. Right, because you have to be able to test these in consequential ways. And so when you're working with AI, I've always said that thoughtful experience design strives to enhance humanity, not replace it, and that we are always keeping human agency, which is paramount, right, to balancing our interaction between people, machines, and the planet, and the algorithms that we're working with, and do so in a way that where it is augmenting a weakness versus trying to take over. The other part, and I think this is an important one, is about transparent truth and offering transparent truth. If you want to build trustworthy systems or a trustworthy product, you have to plainly explain to users and customers how the system, your invention or your product or your service comes to a conclusion or a decision or a projection or even a prediction. And you could do that with really simple design mechanisms like data analysis, progress indicators, corpus sourcing. Where is the information and how is the system making the selection? And being clear to the user about that. And then of course, confidence scores, really key. It's that, just because a machine decides it's going to take an action before it does, what is the confidence score of the outcome? And then of course, explanatory interfaces. Sometimes you hear explanation, right? But it is explaining to the user what the system is doing at all times and doing so in an artful way. And you see that in the work that we do. And when you think about, you see it in Alexa. One of my favorite and most beautiful things I love is watching her think and seeing her as her think. And if you have any of our Echo shows, being able to show where the source of information comes from. It's these little things that build trust over time. And the last part I will talk about around, I think often it's not talked about enough, is privacy. I think a lot of times we went, ooh, that's too hairy of a subject. We shouldn't touch that one. But in reality, what we're seeing is, the EU, Brazil, now the state of California has implemented privacy laws. And we as companies and as designers need to understand what those laws and the constraints are, and that they're there to help the consumer, not stand in the way of our progress, but it's actually helps us be a better designer. It's a new constraint. And we have to be very transparent and pledge that we are communicating the process in which we are handling the data and the stakeholders in handling the data. The last thing I'll leave you with is security. People think security is like this underlying thing, like maybe it's important. Let's be very clear. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security is at that base level. When we do not feel secure, we are very unlikely to adopt a technology, adopt a product, a service, or an innovation. So secure cognitive experience design is about protecting humans with strong safety mechanisms in there. And I use security practices to avoid unintended results of AI. So one of those security practices is actually an AI security practice that is it's really powered by all of our autonomous inventions. And we use that safety research to test in constrained environments and unconstrained environments, and during the operational deployment of any service that we've ever created. So I think that when you think about ethics, it's not a one-off thought or fleeting thought. It has to be the basis of how we think moving forward. And that's been a part of what I have brought to cognitive experience design with 10 principles for ingenuity.
So Joanna, what does this mean for companies that are looking to redefine their human experience programs, right? What kind of reskilling would they have to do? And what kind of new people would they have to bring in to their design team?
So I think there's kind of three important pieces to that answer. The first one is that we have to remove the barriers and risks from failure. And what I mean by that is that in most corporations, not the one that I work for, let's be very clear, the one I work for has been an eye-opener of what it means to be an inventor. And when you reduce the risk of failure, how much more innovation you actually get. But so often people feel like they're staking their careers on one invention, and they cannot feel that way. There's too much at stake, when in fact, what we always should be looking to do is learn from what those are and try to build off of it, as opposed to shying away from innovating. And it's very hard to do in large companies where they have a muscle memory of doing things a certain way. So that's one aspect, is you've got to reduce the risk level of someone actually coming up with an idea, trying to experiment with it and implementing it. The second part of that is looking at your existing employee base and offering them ongoing opportunities to learn. I think the new generation of folks coming in the door are coming in with really good skills. Not enough of them still. We still need a whole new generation of people who know how to code, whether that's in Python or just having basic technical aptitude to operate things like machinery and robotics. It's going to be really critical. One of my favorite things to do in workshops in these areas is that even within my own team, I try to create on a quarterly basis the space for us to play. For those of you who are interested in reskilling, one of the best courses that I ever took or was involved with was actually a course at MIT called, it was kind of the kindergarten forever in kindergarten, but one of them was learning how to code with Scratch, which was a visual coding language, and creating animations and things like that. So, if you take yourself back to your kindergarten self and allow yourself to move backwards in time and create that space and time is super critical. But it can't be an incentive just to go do it outside of the enterprise. You actually have to create these learning institutions inside as mechanisms and look at productivity in a different way, right? Because you can have great productivity numbers, but if the people aren't learning new skills, then it's very likely that you're going to fail to invent, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you don't actually move the company forward. So investing in your employees' bases, technology skills is going to be really great. And then incentivizing people is a really important other part. That's the third part, is placing incentives for people to learn. And I think that's a really important, critical thing. But look, the world is being written in code. If you do not have command of the command line, I can assure you, you will not have command of your world.
Wow, that's a strong statement. So switching gears a little bit, Joanna, if I'm part of an R&D team or if I'm part of a product team in a large multinational, what are some of the specific things that cognitive design thinking could offer me that a traditional human design thinking approach may not?
Well, cognitive experience design thinking is actually going to get us to a future state, and focuses in on the future state versus the low-hanging fruit of here and now. I think the incrementalism that sometimes is a death by a thousand cuts. What it does is it begs you to explore new narratives and actually write new narratives for the future, and then experiment your way to getting to the tomorrow that seems right for your company. And it does so in a way where it injects scientific, objective information and data into the process, into that iterative process. So it's not really an either or, but what we are doing is designing for thinking, right? And designing for doing, as opposed to making people think like designers. Not everybody's going to think like a designer, but if we are all in the business of designing for our user and the way that they think and their mental models, we're all going to end up in a much better space. And we will end up in a much better space because you reduce risk when you introduce new data and information, and you create new models. And so, utilizing artificial intelligence tools along the design process, whether that is to generate new ideas, help to test and learn, right, in a model for safety or security of a product, or even the longevity of how long that product will last, is something that can be done through the iterative process and not feel like a separate process. Often, our more traditional design thinking was actually put at the business end of it. It became more of a business management versus one that actually took an iterative approach to manufacturing, or an iterative approach to actually producing a product and getting it to market. And I've talked to so many different CEOs that in the manufacturing sector who said, listen, we invested all of this money in design thinking, and great, all of my my marketing managers, if they can brainstorm better, but that didn't help me necessarily actually augment my capabilities on the manufacturing cycle, which is where my products are made. And so in a world where everybody is now a digital company, everyone now is a technology company, everyone from the car companies to your bank, how do you improve that product? And so what cognitive experience design does is actually focuses in on the operations of a company, and how we produce things and how those things are organized, so that we are bringing those important cognitive leaders into the design process and reducing cognitive load in a way that keeps people focused and enjoying the job that they're doing.
So Joanna, how can cognitive design thinking help in manufacturing plants? Could you share a few examples of how this approach has created new possibilities?
Absolutely. I'm going to do it in the area of maybe consumer electronics manufacturing is one area. Also in automotive is another. Cognitive experience design, right, is the act of working with AI as a tool, right, and working with things like biomimicry, things like that in the process. And so what has been exciting to see is that within manufacturing, I'm actually saying cognitive experience design reinvent time as we know it to manufacture a product, to accelerate how we can get into manufacturing a product. And I'm seeing it in two very specific ways. In the automotive sector, often when you see a problem on the line, you might actually, it will take a 5-year cycle to recycle and fix that in the manufacturing process. That's kind of the lead time as you look at it. Consumer electronics is roughly 2 years. But in that, when you are able to use generative technologies, machine learning and generative design, which is a form of cognitive experience design, it gives us tools to better assess quality control and shorten our design time, because in the early modelings, we are able to put in new inspiration into our models for a system to output thousands of design ideas and do so in a way that allows us to test and learn off of, a subset of these ideas, which makes sense to go to market with. So it's doing things like reducing material waste, and more specifically, it's improving product reuse and being able to perform predictive maintenance and so much more. So that's in manufacturing. The other area that I would say is when we talk about generative design is actually being able in consumer electronics, for those of us who work in the area of wearables, human wearables, right, where we're augmenting the human, being able to get closer and closer to the human form is going to be really critical. And a part of it is part material science and part of it is aesthetic fashion. And so being able to bring in data models into the design process that spit out, 1,000 ideas that you go and you test and you learn with, and then you create test models of how this product will perform over time and how will it actually fit. Because so many of us are creating kind of, I call it ready to wear future fashion, right? Everything from the earbuds to necklaces to rings and glasses, all augmenting the human form. We want to be able to try to create one product that services many. And so in doing that, being able to do some anthropometric measurements and bring generative design into that to see, use those measurements of 95% of the global population to inform our design throughout the process is, I think, so super important to creating devices that first do no harm and then fit well, sound well, or actually give me abilities that I didn't have before.
Joanna, do you envisage a future where corporate strategy would be centered around cognitive design thinking, where maybe we're going to replace some of those spreadsheets with design for thinking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope to. One of my least favorite thing is spreadsheets. However, I've actually, now that you work with data models, you work with them even more. And I would say that I have been very excited about some of the data tools that have emerged and the ability to visualize those tools, because I think visualization and data visualization actually helps people make better decisions. Not all, by the way, data visualization does that. So, I think it's the ones that practice radical simplicity and enabling the data to tell a story, and having that data do so in a way where it's telling a story and enables better decisions or faster decisions within the enterprise. So from a business perspective, I don't know that we'll ever get rid of fully of the spreadsheet, but what I will tell you is that we're quickly on our way to realizing how we take in that information to get to better decisions, because all of those spreadsheets are inevitably trying to get us to a decision, right? The numbers inside of them are helping us understand whether it is a process or a product or the way that consumers are engaging with us. They are an analysis tool. And now with things like machine learning and modeling and the visualization of that, we can get to better methods of better outcomes and predictive outcomes that we can actually transform the way that we are actually doing business today, which tends to feel very manual. But if you compare it to I always compare it to what my parents were dealing with when they didn't have a computer on their desk. We're still in a really good place. Now we just have tools that accelerate our abilities to conduct analysis and come to quicker conclusions.
Joanna, these are some absolutely fascinating insights, and I'm sure they're going to inspire a lot of people to predict and dare to engineer tomorrow by designing it today. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's joined today. It's just an honor to be here. And I implore every one of you, take a moment at this pandemic time. I have taken some time to actually create new skills for myself. And not only is that, it improves your bottom line profitability as a human being, but what inevitably it does, it stretches our imagination. And in doing so, we realize that we all have a part to play in making a better world and the world that we're leaving for the next generation.